I just remembered mine and scurried over to my purse. But it's great to be in this place and time tonight with Tony, and finally, it's great to have it come together. I am Rebecca Meebert, and I am a member of this congregation. I am a friend of Diane Campbell, who's a very important figure in this. Diane, where are you? There you are. Okay. We are here primarily at the beginning because of Diane's interest and vision of having Judge Anthony J. Sciolino. I'm saying that wrong. Sciolino, okay. Visit this community. Tony, say your name right.
Tony Sciolino.
Sciolino. It's a soft C.
Soft C.
Diane has corrected me, but I'm from Texas. It's hopeless. Visit this community and share his book, The Holocaust, the Church, and the Law of Unintended Consequences. So Diane, thank you for bringing Tony and his wife Gloria, who is right there taking pictures, to this community. And Tony will also be available with afterwards for book signing if you wish. And Diane and Paul, her husband, will be helping with those sales. He'll also be at the Barnes & Noble at the Town Square Mall tomorrow from 2 to 5. If somebody had to miss tonight and wants to meet him, or if you want to buy a book tomorrow, and they are also available on Amazon and ebooks, but you can't have books signed if you do that. There are many people who have made this night possible, and I want to make sure that I thank them. Our sponsors, the Board of Directors of the Jewish Federation, represented tonight by Sema Arbach, the Executive Director. Sema? Wave, okay. The Board of Directors of the Broome County Council of Churches, represented by Joe Selipek, who is the Executive Director there. Joe, thank you. And I just saw Jack Gilroy walk in somewhere. Jack, he's one of the founders of the Friends of Franz Jagerstatter and Breaking the Silence discussion group. I had to practice and I still didn't get it right. But Franz is mentioned in Tony's book as being one of the heroes that we're talking about tonight. Father Tim Taher of St. Francis of Assisi in Hillcrest is a member of this group. He regretted not being able to be here. There was a previously scheduled thing in his church and he couldn't make it. So Jack, we're thanking you for representing the organization, and I think there might be other people here from that organization. And then we are here in this space courtesy of the session of the United Presbyterian Church and our newly installed pastor as of yesterday, Kimberly Chastain. Where are you, Kimberly? Okay, so it is a goal of this congregation to open it to the community to use the space, and we're glad you're here. Retired Monroe County Family Court Judge Tony, I've gotten to call you, has been named winner of the 2013 Silver Medal for World History from the Independent Publishers Book Awards. He received his medal on May 29th at a ceremony in New York City. Tony is also an ordained Catholic deacon, Roman Catholic deacon, and he says that he wrote this book as a reminder that the forces of bigotry and fear are as real today as ever and must, as always, be opposed by people of goodwill. He lives in Pittsford, New York with his wife Gloria, and they are the parents of an adult daughter, Kate. Just a couple of words personally. I knew about the Holocaust, Tony. I had visited the museum in Washington, D.C. with a group of people. I have read the Diary of Anne Frank, as you had, and many other books, seen movies, talked with survivors and their families. What your book revealed to me was that you look back to the history of how the Bible was written and how words and history in many of our books that are not carefully studied can be misused to lead to so much persecution, isolation, death, and many other consequences. Not just the Holocaust, not just one group of people, but over hundreds of years. This continues to happen in our communities with different players and subjects. Can we learn? Can we respond? And can we not repeat history? Tony, I thank you for sharing with us tonight. Tony will be presenting. We will have questions and answers, and then we will have refreshments for you all to mingle and talk. Thank you so much for coming. Tony?
Becky, thank you for all you've done to put this together. And I'm not going to name the same names, but all of you had anything to do with this event tonight. Clearly, I'm most grateful. I'm from upstate, Rochester, New York. There's no way I could have done this without a great deal of help. And of course, I'm grateful to all of you for coming tonight. How is it that a cradle Catholic like myself came to write a book about his church that, quite frankly, is not, well, is critical of his church? This is a question that comes up every time I gather to speak on this subject. What I'd like to begin tonight is to tell you my journey to this book and how it is that I came to write the book. And my first encounter with the Holocaust happened, I was all of 11 or 12 years old. I was a junior, or rather in junior high school in Rochester, Benjamin Franklin High School, and I read a book about a girl who kept a diary, as many of you probably did as well. It was about a Jewish girl trapped in Amsterdam by the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands during World War II. Anne Frank, she was about 13 years old when, in 1942, she began to write her diary. 22 days before going into hiding, together with her mother, father, and sister, where they remained in hiding for some 25 months. Betrayed in August of 1944 by an anonymous informant, deported to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, Anne died of typhus fever in March of 1945, only a month before Bergen-Belsen was liberated by the British 11th Armored Division. Now, even as an adolescent, and you know how adolescent boys are, surely. Even as an adolescent, I was troubled by Anne's tragic story. Perhaps in part because she began writing her diary at about the age that I was reading her diary. So it was easy for me to connect with Anne. Over the decades since 1959, I've had many experiences that have deepened my understanding of and increased my uneasiness over the Holocaust. Now, my next encounter with the Holocaust happened in 1964. I was 19 years old. I was a freshman at Columbia College in New York City. And I attended a play that was then on Broadway entitled The Deputy. A controversial play accusing the wartime Pope Pius XII of failure to speak out or take action during the Holocaust. Now, the play portrayed Pius's quote-unquote silence as cowardly and criminal. And The Deputy was a play on the title Vicar of Christ. So, Vicar of Christ became Deputy. And basically, the playwright's premise was Pius wasn't acting like the Vicar of Christ. He was acting more like a politician. But in any event, at age 19, I, like many Catholics at the time, thought that this had to be a calumny, a scandal on a good man, Pius XII. A typical reaction at the time was that the play was a malicious attack against the memory of a good and courageous world leader occupying the chair of Peter during one of the worst catastrophes in human history. Cardinal Francis Spellman of the Archdiocese of New York, for example, condemned the play as an outrageous desecration of the honor of a great and good man, and an affront to those who know his record as a humanitarian who love him and revere his memory. And as a non-critical thinking, pre-Vatican Council II, pray, pay, and obey kind of Catholic, which is how we were back before Vatican Council II, I was scandalized by the deputy, and I rejected the playwright's contention as preposterous. It couldn't possibly be. Meanwhile, back at Columbia, my professors were challenging me to question my belief systems, to open my mind to differing points of view, to be wary of absolutist claims, and to avoid non-critical thinking. Now, after graduating from college in 1967, I married my high school sweetheart, who's taking pictures in the back, Gloria Scalny, and began attending Cornell Law School, where I learned how to analyze complex cases and fact patterns according to legal principles, how to formulate conclusions based on facts, and how to advocate persuasively for a proposition or cause. Later, as a Monroe County Family Court judge from 1986 to 2006, I honed my skills at fact-finding, dispassionately weighing evidence through the lens of my life experiences, applying applicable principles, and rendering what I considered to be just decisions in thousands of difficult and sometimes controversial cases. Now, my favorite biblical passage is from Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? Serving as a Monroe County Family Court judge for 20 years afforded me a unique opportunity and challenge to put those words of Micah into action. In 1993, I began to consider entering the deacon formation program of the Diocese of Rochester. After a good deal of prayer and reflection, at age 54, while I was serving on the bench, I decided to enter the program. 4 years later, 1998, I earned a Master of Theology degree from St. Bernard's Institute of Theology and Ministry, and was ordained a permanent deacon of the Roman Catholic Church. So I am a part of the hierarchy, if you will. A very low part of the hierarchy, to be sure, but I'm part of the hierarchy. My graduate level courses included theology of church and church history. And some of what I learned troubled me, quite frankly, especially the church's attitude toward and treatment of Jews through the centuries. And this is an attitude that I had heard hinted about, but hadn't really addressed in any depth. In 2004, I went to see Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion of the Christ. Any of you see The Passion of the Christ? Okay. Well, if you recall, at the time there were critics of the movie who claimed that it was anti-Semitic. Now, after viewing the film detailing Jesus' final hours and crucifixion, filled with excessively long and graphic violence and grossly exaggerated depictions of stereotypical Jews, I concluded that the critics were right. And incidentally, I saw the movie with 2 Jewish friends. And when I came out, I turned to my Jewish friends and said, I feel like I need to take a shower. And I was embarrassed to have seen it with them. So I concluded the critics were right. In contrast, however, Father Augustine de Noia, spokesman for the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, who is still a spokesman for the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, which incidentally is a successor of the Holy Inquisition, was asked about the film's faithfulness to the New Testament, and he replied, Mel Gibson's movie is not a documentary, but a work of artistic imagination. Gibson's film is entirely faithful to the New Testament. So, we disagreed. During our 46 years of marriage, Gloria and I have often traveled to places connected in some way to the Holocaust. For example, following my graduation from law school in 1970, we went to the Netherlands, where we toured the Anne Frank House Museum in Amsterdam. Then in Germany, we went to the Dachau concentration camp, only a few miles outside Munich in predominantly Catholic Bavaria. On a trip in 1983 that included Poland, Gloria is of Polish descent, we toured the death camp of Majdanek on the outskirts of Lublin, where the most striking feature is a huge mound of human ashes that reminded me of a small, you know when you're on the thruway and you see the salt piles? That's what it reminded me of, but it wasn't salt. It was human ashes. Never forget the sight, burned into my memory banks. And on that trip, because Gloria is of Polish extraction, we also visited the rural village of Rudnik na San, site of her grandmother's family home. A rustic structure with a wood-burning stove and no indoor plumbing. It was an experience. We stayed there overnight, sleeping in a bed with a straw mattress. The next day, one of Gloria's cousins told us that for a few days during the occupation of Poland during World War II, a Nazi soldier slept in that very bed. Now, upon his departure, perhaps heading toward the Eastern Front in the siege of Stalingrad, the soldier left behind a painting, saying he would return to retrieve the painting. Well, the soldier, like many soldiers during that terrible war, never returned to retrieve it, and the painting still hung on the wall in the living room. While on a trip to Rome in 2006, the Eternal City, in addition to Vatican City, Gloria and I toured Rome's historic Jewish ghetto, established by order of Pope Paul IV in the 16th century. On October 16th, 1943, it's now October 7th, right? October 16th of 1943, following Benito Mussolini's fall from power and Rome's occupation by the Nazis, 365 German soldiers rounded up over 1,000 Roman Jews and amassed them in the piazza. Jews have been a part of Rome since before the time of Peter and Paul. Ironically, this piazza, within walking distance of the papal apartments in St. Peter's Square, is named Santa Maria del Pianto, Mother of Sorrows, which seems to me is a bit ironic, don't you think? Named Mother of Sorrows after the church located there. Now, many of the Jews rounded up that day were leaving Yom Kippur services in the historic synagogue adjoining the piazza, because that's where most of the Jews of Rome were that night, attending Yom Kippur services. The convoy of trucks transporting the captives to the railway terminal took a route along the Tiber River, and Gloria and I walked it, that passed St. Peter's Square. And shortly after arriving at the terminal, the captives were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp, the largest of the 8 killing camps on Polish soil, where 811 of them were gassed upon arrival. Only 16 survived. The Holocaust didn't just happen in Germany. It happened all over the 21 countries of Europe. And it wasn't just Germans involved. It was Europeans. 94 to 95% of whom were Christian. 40% Catholic, the balance Protestant. No way you can conclude, if you study the Holocaust, that that terrible tragedy was anything other than what the Christians did to the Jews. As Gloria and I strolled along the shops and restaurants lining the piazza within the ghetto, and now it's a lovely place. There are shops and restaurants, and I'm sure rents are sky high. But as we walked along the piazza, I noticed a plaque on a building, and this plaque was dedicated to the infants rounded up on that day back in October of 1943. And this is what it said: "E non cominciarono neppure a vivere." They never even had a chance to live. And in 2008, we visited for the first time the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. I want to read to you the dedication page in my book. This book is dedicated to the memory of the 1.5 million children murdered during the Holocaust, denied the chance to become the persons God intended them to be. It is also dedicated to the memory of the countless children of the 6 million victims of the Holocaust, denied the chance to be born. It wasn't just 6 million. It was many, many more times 6 million, because of the generations that we will never know because of what happened. Now, the Holocaust is also known as the Shoah, and I prefer the name Shoah to Holocaust because Holocaust means burnt offering, and Shoah means catastrophe. So burnt offering is not an appropriate description of what happened. Catastrophe. But by whatever name, it was a systematic, state-organized persecution and murder of 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million children, by Nazi Germany and its European collaborators. Also targeted were 5 million members of other groups, including homosexuals, gypsies, Soviet POWs, Jehovah's Witnesses, Freemasons, people with disabilities, communists, socialists, and other political and religious dissidents. It didn't take much to come within the Nazi target list. With poison gas, but not just poison gas, with bullets, the noose, knives, combustion engine exhaust, clubs, fists, disease, starvation, death marches, and overwork. The perpetrators of the Holocaust slaughtered two-thirds of Europe's Jews and 1/3 of world Jewry. And if Hitler had not lost the war, and it was not a foregone conclusion that Hitler would lose the war, if Hitler had not lost, that number he would have reached his goal. His goal was to eliminate Jews from Europe. And he came very close. And even as the Allies were coming to liberate the death camps, the Nazis continued to kill and attempt to dispose of the bodies. Even when they knew the jig was up, the war was over, they were still killing Jews until the last minute. Now, according to the Visitor's Guide to the U.S. Holocaust Museum, the museum's mission is threefold. 1, to advance and disseminate knowledge, so we never forget. 2, to preserve the memory of those who suffered. And there were millions and millions and millions who suffered. And 3, to encourage visitors to reflect upon the moral and spiritual questions raised by the Holocaust. Now, for many years, since I was in junior high school back in Rochester, New York, I've been troubled by this moral and spiritual question. How could the worst catastrophe in human history have started in one of the most Christian countries, Germany, of predominantly Christian Europe, birthplace of Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. Now this book is primarily about the Catholic Church, my church, but the Protestant churches, with the exception of perhaps Jehovah's Witnesses and the Danish Lutheran Church, they didn't do all that much better. Several weeks after retiring from the bench in 2007, I was invited to participate with a number of others in planning, writing the curriculum for, and team teaching an interdisciplinary, multi-session adult education course eventually entitled The 2,000-Year Road to the Holocaust, an interfaith project of the Greater Rochester community. Interfaith project. And I'm so pleased to look out at this audience tonight and know that there are various faiths, different faiths represented. Because quite frankly, that's how we should study the Holocaust, among our faiths. Because our faiths didn't function as we would have hoped them to. Now, at that time, I just retired. I was looking for projects to keep me busy in retirement, and I wanted to learn still more about the Holocaust. So I accepted this invitation without hesitation. Eager to use my college, law school, and judicial skills to research a topic that had troubled me for many, many years, I began my inquiry into what part, if any, the church, my church, played leading up to and during the Holocaust. Now, in identifying and weighing the historical evidence, I was determined to keep an open mind, while simultaneously hoping that my conclusions would exonerate Pope Pius XII in particular, and Christianity in general. 400 plus students took the course in Rochester, which was presented 3 times between 2008 and 2011. The curriculum for my segment of the course became the nucleus of my book, The Holocaust, the Church, and the Law of Unintended Consequences. To my knowledge, I'm the first author who has looked at the Holocaust through the lens of unintended consequences. But there's a subtitle. And the subtitle, spoilers alert, tells you what the book is about. How Christian anti-Judaism spawned Nazi anti-Semitism. And you need to know that the official position of my church is that this is wrong. Right, in 1998, under Pope John Paul II, a document was written that said Nazi anti-Semitism arose out of neo-paganism, outside of anything the church had done. So I'm on the other side of the issue with my church. And no, I haven't heard from the Vatican yet. And I haven't heard from my own bishop in Rochester, but you need to know we've been waiting, we're between bishops. We're waiting for a new bishop to be appointed. In April 2009, Gloria and I, we traveled to the Holy Land for the first time. In Jerusalem, we visited Yad Vashem, Holocaust Memorial, Museum and Memorial, and we observed an exhibit that included a photo of Pope Pius XII, the wartime pope, next to a placard on which was written a brief description of his controversial actions during the 12 years of the Third Reich. And the Third Reich was supposed to last 1,000 years. 1,000 years. It lasted 12, and it created a lot of havoc. I learned later that the Vatican formally protested the historical accuracy of the caption, and on his historic visit to Jerusalem in May of 2009, Pope Benedict XVI, now emeritus, refused to enter the main building of the museum complex where the caption and photo are located. Pope Pius XII is among the names being considered to be named Pope. We know that John the 23rd, who called the Vatican Council II into session, will be named a Pope. We know that Pope John Paul II, Saint, will be named a saint, right, I'm sorry. And there is a move, and has been a move for several years, to name Pius XII a saint. If you don't have a position on that, I invite you to read my book and you come to your own decision. Now, in Poland, in May of 2010, I participated in a student leadership mission to Germany and Poland entitled The March, Bearing Witness to Hope, sponsored by Nazareth College and Hobart William and Smith Colleges. It turned out to be a most informative and emotional experience. We visited and learned about primary sites associated with the Holocaust, including in Berlin, Bebelplatz. Bebelplatz is a lovely plaza across from Humboldt University. And Bebelplatz is notorious because the Nazis staged book burnings of Jewish authors and Jewish-inspired authors at that very spot. And outside Berlin, we visited a beautiful villa on Lake Wannsee, where on January 20th, 1942, at the Wannsee Conference, the final solution was made. Hitler's plan to exterminate European Jewry. If you're ever in Berlin, go check out the villa at Lake Wannsee. Lovely villa, lovely gardens, and then walk inside and see the rooms where the final solution was hatched over lunch. In Poland, the group toured many sites, among them the Warsaw Ghetto, one of thousands of ghettos in occupied Europe. We visited Auschwitz-Birkenau, Majdanek, Treblinka death camps, and we visited the village of Tikocin in northeast Poland. Our Israeli guide informed us that in June of 1941, the death camps did not begin operation until the end of June of 1942. Before the death camps were up and running, the town of Tikocin is one of hundreds of such towns and villages in Eastern Europe caught up in what has been termed the Holocaust by bullets. Holocaust by bullets. Before the first death camp was in operation, 2 million Jews were killed already, one bullet at a time. On August 25th, 1941, all of Tikocin's Jewish residents, men, women, and children, were ordered to assemble in the market square, and from there, 1,400 of them were transported in trucks to large pits dug in the forest outside the village, and there they were summarily executed. Machine guns. Our group visited and prayed at the execution and burial site. Just one of hundreds of such towns where the mobile killing squads of the SS went through like locusts and killed in excess of 2 million Jews. Now, in September of 2010, Gloria and I traveled Eastern Europe for the first time, where in Slovakia near Prague, we toured the Theresienstadt concentration camp in the town of Terezin, about 25 miles outside of Prague. And while in Budapest, Hungary, we went to the Shoes on the Danube Promenade, a memorial on the bank of the Danube River that honors Hungarian Jews killed in 1944 as the war was clearly being lost in the East. And they were killed not by Nazis, not by German soldiers. They were killed by local fascist militiamen, as happened in Croatia, Poland, Lithuania, etc., etc. Late in the war, victims were marched to the site, ordered to take off their shoes, and shot in the back of the head at water's edge so that their bodies would fall into the river and be carried away. And the evocative memorial represents the shoes left behind on the bank. If you're ever in Prague, check out this memorial. It's off the beaten track, and if you don't know it's there, you're not going to see it. But it's worth a trip to be sure. Now, using judicial skills to identify and weigh the evidence of my extensive research, and yes, for 5 years I was researching the book before it ever got written. Viewing the evidence through the lens of my life experiences, these are among the findings of facts and conclusions of law that I drew. And I'm just going to give you a representative sampling, because you really need to read the book, and you'll see that it's 2,000 years of history. Abraham Joshua Heschel said, "The Holocaust did not begin at Auschwitz. It happened with words." Right? And it happened with words 2,000 years ago, and it starts in Scripture. And then you go to the patristic fathers, the sermons of the patristic fathers. And then you look at the decrees of ecumenical councils. And you look at decrees of popes. It's all laid out. Okay, first conclusion. The Holocaust was a unique, clearly defined historical event, but its causes, including anti-Semitism, racism, fear, envy, greed, sadism, hatred, ignorance, intolerance, careerism, territorial expansionism, nationalism, the fog of war, failure of conscience, lack of moral guidance, bigotry, and evil are all still present. Anybody doubt that anti-Semitism is still alive and present throughout the world? Yeah. 2, the Holocaust happened in Christian Europe. Christian Europe. There's no way of getting around that. 95% Christian Europe. The heart of Western civilization, little more than 68 years ago. We're not talking the Crusades. We're talking 68 years ago. But even today, genocide, ethnic cleansing, and other state-sanctioned crimes against humanity take place worldwide. And need I remind you that the president of Syria, Mr. Assad, gassed sarin 1,400 of his own people just weeks ago? 1,400? 3, for close to 2,000 years, the Roman Catholic Church, my church, harbored a powerful anti-Jewish bias rooted in its doctrine termed anti-Judaism, which became, albeit unintentionally, a powerful force for evil. I had never heard the term anti-Judaism until I was in grad school studying for my Master's of Theology. I would venture to say that most Catholics, indeed most Christians, have never heard the term anti-Judaism. And if you ask them, have you ever heard of anti-Judaism? They will likely say, you mean anti-Semitism. Well, the word anti-Semitism was not coined until 1879. Because in the last 3 decades, or the 3 decades of that century, anti-Semitism arose. Anti-Judaism is fear or distaste, dislike of Jews based on their religion. Anti-Semitism is fear, distaste, hatred of Jews based on their race. And guess what? Judaism is not a race. But you don't want to confuse bigots with facts. They don't like that too much. The image of Jews as deicides. What's a deicide? A God killer. And their stubborn refusal to convert to Christianity, right? They killed my Lord. They killed the Messiah. They killed God. And worse than that, they won't convert. That was the doctrine of the church until Vatican Council II repudiated it. But that doctrine fueled more Christian intolerance, hatred, and violence against Jews than any other than perhaps be subject to the rulers before you. Right? That's a line out of St. Paul. We should obey our lawful rulers. Well, unhappily, some Christians during World War II took that to mean, well, Adolf Hitler is the Führer. He's the lawful government of of Germany, right? Orders are orders. Where was conscience? Conscience was anesthetized. Christian conscience wasn't functioning vis-a-vis the Jews. Why? because of 2,000 years of anti-Judaism. Scripture has been misinterpreted and or misused to justify anti-Semitism, slavery, segregation, apartheid, religious intolerance, subjugation of women and other minorities, unjust wars, torture, burning of heretics, and the killing of infidels, all in the name of God. And it's still going on today in the Middle East. People are killing each other and they're invoking Allah as if Allah is pleased with the killing that's going on in Allah's name. Isn't that blasphemy? Religion is routinely exploited as a political tool. In the hands of a tyrant, religion is exploited, right? Case in point, Vladimir Putin in Russia. All of a sudden, homosexuals got to be stamped out as whatever he's doing there. What's really going on? He's pandering to the Russian Orthodox Church, right? The Russian Orthodox Church during the Soviet era didn't exist, right? Because it was atheistic communism. Well, the Soviet system fell. Russian Orthodox Church is coming up. Now, Mr. Putin, who just happened to be the head of the KGB under this former service, has found religion, and he wants the votes, not that it matters because they think they rigged their elections, he wants the votes of the Orthodox Christians. So he's wrapping himself with religiosity, which is precisely what Adolf Hitler did, right? Because he couldn't have done he couldn't have got away with what he got away with if he wasn't exploiting religion. And he did it masterfully. Blind obedience to authority often leads to calamitous results. Lots of people in Germany and throughout Europe were blindly obedient to people who were telling them what to do. Now, conscience is supposed to intervene in those situations, which is God's word in our consciences that helps us to understand the difference between right and wrong. Christian conscience was anesthetized, was not working, because of 2,000 years of anti-Judaism. For close to 2 millennia, Jews have been humiliated, victimized, denigrated, discriminated against, expelled from countries, forced to live in ghettos. The first ghettos were imposed by order of popes or ecumenical councils. They were demonized, stigmatized as other, portrayed as offspring of the devil. Offspring of the devil is something that Adolf Hitler used to like to talk about when he was talking about the Jews. These are words that came out of either scripture or early theologians. Jews were wrongly blamed for causing human and natural disasters. They scapegoated for just about every evil in the Weimar Republic. They were accused of libels like the ritual murder of Christian children. Did you ever hear about the Christian murder, the blood libel? Jews supposedly kidnapped and killed Christian children for their blood, and they used the blood to make matzos, which they consumed at their religious rites. Now, if you're a Jew, you know that that can't be right, because if you touch blood, you're ritually impure. No self-respecting Jew would have anything to do with blood, because it makes you impure. But you don't want to confuse bigots with facts. And this blood libel myth is alive and well, particularly in the Middle East. People want to believe that it's true. But it's not. It's false. Just like the protocols of the elders of Zion. There are a number of these myths that refuse to go away that I talk about in the book. All of this, the ritual murder of children, tortured and killed, it happened by Christians. Christians did this, right? With at least the implicit or sometimes explicit approval of the church. Regrettably, Nazi propaganda in the 20th century effectively exploited this shameful tradition of anti-Judaism to pave the way for the Holocaust. Clergy acted as cheerleaders for the German war effort, even when the war was clearly being lost. if you were a Catholic in Germany during the war, World War II, right, you would pray at the beginning and end of Mass for victory on the front, for the boys fighting an unjust war that included committing genocide, subjugating innocent people, taking over sovereign territory. You can't conceive of a war that was more unjust than World War II. But nonetheless, German Catholics were praying for victory of the Weimar. Clergy were part of the Nazi race attestation bureaucracy used to identify and target Jews. Let me see that again. Clergy were part of the Nazi race attestation bureaucracy used to identify and target Jews. In the beginning, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Inaction, they have consequences. Perhaps intended consequences, but also unintended consequences. And unintended consequences can be as lethal, as awful, as intended consequences. Clergy acted as cheerleaders for the German war effort, even when the war was clearly being lost. And there are quotes of bishops and priests in there urging their congregations to support the war effort. There were at least 138 German priests who actively promoted National Socialism. They were Nazis. Some of them joined the Nazi Party and fully embraced Hitler's policy. These are the ones we know about. There are a lot more closeted ones who weren't officially, but by their actions you could assume that they were Nazis, or certainly they were sympathetic to the Nazi cause. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda, Heinrich Himmler, SS Chief and Overseer of Death Camps, Reinhard Heydrich, Principal Planner of the Final Solution, Rudolf Hess, Architect and SS Commandant of Auschwitz-Birkenau. What did they all have in common? They're all baptized Roman Catholics. Adolf Hitler, my co-religionist. Catholics comprised a third of Germany's military, police, security forces, 22% of the SS, judiciary, my former profession, civil service, medical, and concentration killing camp staff. And the balance was Protestant. How many Catholic Nazis excommunicated? Bill? You're shaking your head no. You're absolutely right. Not one. There are those in my church who want to excommunicate legislators who want to give women, health issues. They want to make abortion reasonable and affordable. They want to excommunicate the legislators. How come not one Nazi excommunicated during World War II? How about after? Why not even after? Do it, post-mortem, just for the show, just for the symbolism of it.
Pius XII is still alive. Why should he do it?
That's the point. How many Requiem Masses for the victims of the Holocaust by Pius XII?
None.
0. My church couldn't even talk about the Holocaust until he passed from the scene, and thank God we got soon-to-be Saint Pope John the 23rd, who called the Vatican Council II, that came out with a repudiation of 2,000 years of anti-Judaism and various other repudiations. You will not believe what was the official doctrine of my church until Vatican Council II. Hitler, despite being thoroughly amoral, right? He wasn't a real Catholic. He was thoroughly amoral. He cloaked his writings and his rhetoric with religiosity. This guy was an evil genius. He knew exactly what he was doing, knowing full well that doing that, cloaking himself with religiosity to be able to appeal to his people throughout Europe, would resonate with Christians, German and non-German alike. The killing of Jews was done with the willing collaboration of many thousands of Germans and non-German Catholics, Christians, including Father Joseph Tiso, priest and fascist leader of Slovakia. Yes, Slovakia had a priest as their Führer. Father Miroslav Flipovic, priest and death camp commandant in Croatia. Cardinal Alojzij Stepinac, Vatican-appointed primate of Croatia. You know what all three have in common? A cardinal and two priests. They were all convicted of war crimes after the war. And Fathers Tiso and Flipovic were executed. Father Flipovic while he was wearing his robes. How many of you have ever heard of those people before? Yeah. Well, maybe some of you have. I didn't until I got into this. This is information that we ought to know, right? We ought to confront, we ought to understand in an interfaith setting. Because I'm not just talking about my church. What I'm saying applied across the board. There are only a couple of exceptions. Most Christians of the period were guilty in varying degrees of what happened, including the bystanders. You're not supposed to be a bystander if you're a Christian. Right? Remember the parable of the Good Samaritan? When you see somebody in trouble, when you see injustice being performed, you're not supposed to look the other way or pretend it's not happening. You're not supposed to not get your hands dirty. No. A Christian is supposed to pursue justice. Justice, justice you shall pursue. That's from Deuteronomy. Most Christians of the period were guilty in varying degrees, including the bystanders. Now there were righteous Christians, thank God, who risked their lives to protect and comfort their persecuted Jewish and sisters and brothers. And these are the ones who Yad Vashem has recognized as righteous Gentiles. Right? And there are some 23,000 of them who have been named to date. And Poland has more righteous Gentiles than any other country. But ladies and gentlemen, they were too few. Had more Christians acted, if Christians practiced what they preached, or supposedly preached, the Holocaust wouldn't have happened. Being a righteous Christian wouldn't have earned you special recognition. Now, the church rejects the notion that Christianity and Judaism based on religion played any role in the rise of Nazi anti-Semitism based on race. So right there, I'm at odds with my church. Now, Pope Pius XII should be given credit for what he did to mitigate whatever he did to mitigate the extent of the Holocaust, but also held accountable for what he failed to do. He's not entitled to a free ride. He doesn't get a pass. And in my judgment, it would be a mistake to canonize him a saint. But stay tuned, because that's coming up. And I'm
mitigate the Holocaust.
Let me finish, and then we'll open it up for questions. History is a study of human behavior and the human spirit, even when both have been profoundly corrupted. Now, the Holocaust is an extreme example of what can happen when prejudice, intolerance, racism run amok. When some people dehumanize and target other people, which continues to the present. Therefore, it's imperative that we study the Holocaust to understand how and why such terrible depravity took place, so that hopefully it will never happen again. Now, this book, my book, is my understanding and judgment of the Holocaust. The product of an inquiry that began over 50 years ago when an adolescent boy read about an adolescent girl who kept a diary. And in effect, it's my verdict, mine alone, in a most difficult and controversial case. And that's the subtitle of the book, A Judge's Verdict. Thank you.
I was curious, you said Pope Pius, or indicated Pope Pius XII did something to mitigate the Holocaust. what actions did he ever take to mitigate it?
No, he did do some things, and he intervened, and he saved some people.
Stay behind here.
All right, I'm sorry. In the book, I try to be scrupulously fair, and I explain what his defenders say, and there's no question that he did some things which saved some lives. But others of his defenders want to give him credit for every cleric who saved a Jew. There's no evidence that Pius issued an edict that Christians were supposed to be saving Jews, right? So yeah, I say give him credit for what he did, but he doesn't get a pass for what he didn't do. And in the book, I detail what it is that he did.
Joe Selbeck.
Yeah, I think it's about time that this history is understood and articulated in the way that you do in your book. One of the questions though that comes up as a result of this has to do with charges that an atheist would make about the effect of religion. He or she might say that this is the natural outcome of religious practice. That maybe it leads to intolerance and to death squads right across the board. So my question for you, I guess, and you're looking at this as a person of faith, is why should we defend the church, or why should we defend faith in the face of these types of outcomes?
Because I think faith, the church was corrupted, and I think it can be corrupted. We need to be vigilant to the fact that the church is made up of people, and people make mistakes, and people sin. And if you have any doubt about that, look at the history of the papacy. Alexander VI, Pope Rodrigo Borgia, he was the most corrupt of the Renaissance popes. He named his son a cardinal, Cesare. He was 18 years old. He wasn't even a priest. And that happens throughout the history. But for every, Rodrigo Borgia, there's a Francis of Assisi or a Catherine of Siena. Let me read to you what Christopher Hitchens says, and I quote him in the book, and he is an atheist. Christopher Hitchens said this. He wrote a book called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. He wrote that organized religion is the main source of hatred in the world because it is violent, irrational, intolerant, allied to racism, tribalism, and bigotry, invested in ignorance and hostile to free inquiry, contemptuous of women and coercive toward children, and accordingly it ought to have a great deal on its conscience. Now, that's true, but that's not to say we ought to scrap religion, right? We ought to be vigilant when people cloak themselves with religiosity and attempt to say that the Bible says this, or the Bible says that, or the Bible's going to be used to do this. We need to be critical thinking, right? We need to be vigilant. It's our religion. After Vatican Council II, the model of church became the people of God. It's not just the hierarchy, it's all of us. All of us are called through baptism to Jesus' threefold priest, prophet, and king. If you keep the gospel of love, if you follow the gospel of love, the kingdom of God would be here. So, yes, we shouldn't scrap religion because some people use religion for their own purposes and bad happens, but we ought to know that that does indeed happen, and we ought to be vigilant that it doesn't happen anymore or again.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
I'd like to ask, when they rounded up the Jewish families in Rome in that piazza, did anybody protest? Did any Christian or Catholic priest or any Christian protest? Anybody come to their aid?
The question is, when the roundup of the Roman Jews was happening in October of 1943, did anybody come to their aid? Did anybody protest? Yes, I'm sure there were those who did. And there were those who risked their lives to protect Jews who weren't picked up and deported. 80% of the Jews of Italy were saved during the Holocaust because ordinary Italians were following a conscience that they basically were acting on their own, because in my judgment, the church wasn't acting as the church should have been acting. What is the function of religion other than to help congregants form conscience? What's more basic than right and wrong? You know? And in my judgment, the church fell down on the formation of conscience insofar as the Jews were concerned. Why? Because of this 2,000-year history of anti-Judaism. They became non-entities. They became non-people. And you could argue that Eugenio Pacelli as Secretary of State and Eugenio Pacelli as Pius XII threw them under the bus through what he was doing, right? In the Reich Concordat, in his exchange of letters. Saint Edith Stein wrote a letter, prophetic letter. She was a Jew who converted to Catholicism and became a Catholic nun. And she was rounded up, and she was eventually sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and she was killed. She wrote a letter to Pope Pius XI in 1933. Hitler had just come to power. And she begged the Pope, Holy Father, it's in the book, you know, Holy Father, what's happening in the name of God to the Jews is an aberration, it's blasphemy. Please, speak out. You know, nothing came of it. So, yeah, there were people who, you know, conscience was working, not because it was self-formed, or they believed, you know, they were trying to practice what the church was preaching. Others were flummoxed, bamboozled.
Beverly? Excuse me, we're going to give everybody a chance before we repeat questioners. Sorry, Beverly.
Personal question. What has been the response from your church, from your community, from other people to your book?
Mostly it's been favorable. I had a talk like this at my own church, the Church of the Transfiguration in Pittsburgh. We had 80 people. We sold 25 books, and people wanted to know. They were hearing this for the first time. And they were critical thinkers. They were open to it. They were at least willing to hear it and consider it. And you know, you don't have to believe me. You know, this is my verdict. This is my research. This is my analysis, and these are my conclusions. But there are people who don't read the book, but they condemn the book. They think they know the history of the church, but they're non-scholars. They don't. And they don't even want to be open to the fact that the church can err, that the Pope can do wrong. And I've gotten letters and phone calls from these folks, and you can't reason with someone who's not reasonable. And when they'll, you know, listen to me, first I'll ask them, have you read the book? And they say no. And then I'll say, well, you know what? You're entitled to your own opinion, but not your facts. Okay? These are my opinions, but the evidence, the facts are there to support them. You show me your facts. And they can't, because they don't have any.
By the way, I did buy an ebook, and I just want to say, I mean, this is not, it's a good book. But anyway, I didn't buy the hard or the actual book, and I think I'm going to do it because he was reading with the annotations and bibliographical commentaries, and they're on the same page as the material it's referring to. In ebooks, it's all at the end, which is a great disservice to
agree.
reading it.
Plus, the ebook will cost you $3.03 on Amazon. How they got that number, I don't understand. So really, you could afford to buy the ebook, but then buy the book itself, because there are 280 footnotes that are
Yeah.
meant to be at the foot of the page, so you can read the footnote as you read the page.
Yeah.
But do as you will.
I did. We didn't talk about that ahead of time. I just noticed when I was reading it, and I thought, wow, I'm missing on that. Other questions? Just okay, Jack.
Yes, I did get the book and did read it, recommend it to everyone, the hard copy. And I just hope that Tony can begin thinking about maybe a contemporary look at the silence of the church. The Catholics, the Protestants, the Jewish members of the community as well, who have refused to speak out with the violence of the United States government over the last 50 years. It's time that we really begin to ask, why don't we hear from people in the pulpit?
Did everybody hear that?
No,
Yes.
You want to summarize?
I mean, if you look at the last 40, 50 years, the church has been silent. It hasn't taken positions on matters of other unjust wars. And it's a legitimate question. When does silence become consent? And you need to understand that. In the common law, there's an aphorism that says, if you're silent, you're consenting to the situation that you're silent over. So I think the gospel needs to be reinterpreted, according to the sign of the times. And it's a fair question to say, is my church doing what the gospel of love, what the pacifist Jesus was preaching? Should we be doing something different? I think that's a legitimate thing to do, to ask.
And Jack, feel free to take your jacket off.
Oh,
I know
yes.
you're just dying. And the additional statement that Jack was making is that all of our holy books bear looking at, and how do we be proactive in a way that is in keeping with our religious traditions. So I would expand that beyond Christianity.
I have not read the book. However, I did listen to a talk by the author. My question is this, is that there's, I see it's sort of some parallelism going on. And speaking as a Protestant, I mean this Christianity with the capital C, not just Catholics or Protestants. But, for example, the treatment of science vis-a-vis Galileo. And centuries after his death was when there was finally an embracing of a sun-centered system. And then the one that sort of piqued my interest was about 2 years ago. The cardinals did a study as to why there was so much sexual abuse by priests. And the upshot of the study was that it was rooted in the free love movement of the 60s. And I'm not a judge, but I raised an eyebrow at that kind of conclusion on it. And so my question is this: do you have anything prescriptive that you can say to the church? You referred to yourself as a cradle Catholic. Your love for the church has to be deep. Is there something prescriptive that you can say?
First thing I would say, well, Pope Francis, I think, is a breath of fresh air. He's the best thing that happened to this church since John the 23rd. But his predecessors, Benedict XVI and John Paul II, for 35 years, it seems to me, they were attempting to put the genie that was let out of the bottle by Vatican Council II back in the bottle. For one thing, there was a point in the history of the church after Vatican Council II when to dissent became sinful, heretical. You know, the Pope says women cannot be priests. Case closed, move on, get off it. You know, well, that doesn't work in the 21st century. Ideas should be explored. And nothing is case closed. Times change. That, you know, anti-Judaism was the doctrine of the church, and in 1965 it was repudiated. And if Vatican Council II hadn't happened, it might still be the doctrine of the church. So those of us who love the church need to always call the leadership of the church back to the meaning of the church. In the case of Christianity, the gospel of love. Now, does anti-Judaism sound like the gospel of love? Hell no. I don't understand how for 2,000 years anybody could have thought that that was. Jesus was born, he lived, and he died a Jew, right? And he was one of the chosen people that the Nazis were trying to exterminate from the face of the earth. Look at what he says in Scripture. How could you justify what 95% of Europe was Christian? Christianity was something, or the Holocaust was something that Christians did to the Jews. But we weren't doing what we should have been doing.
Gentleman back.
Yeah, you mentioned.
Can you speak up?
I started to read the book, I haven't finished it, but you mentioned Jim Carroll's book, Constantine's Sword,
James Carroll.
James Carroll. He had talked about the doctrine of supersessionism,
Yes?
the whole idea that Christianity has replaced Judaism.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could address the arrogance of that doctrine.
I talk about it in the book. And by the way, there are three Abrahamic religions, right? Which is the other of the three that is a supersessionist replacement? What?
Islam.
Islam, right. So Christianity shares supersessionism with Islam. Vatican Council II, I thought, repudiated supersessionism. But if you read some of the things that John Paul II said and some of the things that Benedict XVI said, it seemed like maybe not, it was being clouded. So, but then they're gone now. Now we've got Pope Francis. So I think you can reach God. You know, God's at the top of the mountain. There are many paths up the mountain. I think it's arrogant to think we have the truth and everybody else is wrong. But that was the doctrine of my church until Vatican Council II repudiated it. So,
Okay, a couple more questions, and then we'll let you disperse to bathrooms and refreshments, and talk to Tony and buy books and sign. Yes.
I was wondering, I've been very concerned in recent years about modern-day equivalents of potential Nazi propaganda, like in churches and also in secular media. What is your thought on that?
well, I think people talk about the Holocaust and make allusions to the Holocaust and comparisons, and they're off base. They don't know what they're talking about. You have to be vigilant. You know what? You need to understand the power of propaganda, and Joseph Goebbels and the Nazi propaganda machine perfected it to, it probably isn't, it's probably was as good then as it's ever going to be. We need to be vigilant about the power of propaganda and the power of words. And when we see that, we need to say it. We need to say, wait a minute here, this sounds like what, the big lie. And if you repeat the big lie often enough, it becomes the alternative reality, it becomes the truth.
Tracy?
I appreciate your phrase, the power of words. There's a power in images also. And can you uncover a bit of the image that you have on the front of your book? It's so appalling. And yet is there something about a Sieg Heil that came before Hitler? I'm not trying to justify the motion, but is that motion only meant to give honor to Hitler?
Well, yes, if it's done between 1933 and 1945 in Germany, yes. But they used to hail to Caesar, and it was a salute to an officer. Yes, but this photo was taken in 1933, in July of 1933. It's there. You see 4 priests on the front. If you buy the hardcover, you'll see there are 3 more on the back. And there were 7 priests who were Sieg Heiling. And these are teachers of a parochial school in Germany. And even I saw this picture on the cover of a Watchtower magazine when I was in college. And I couldn't believe it. This picture was seared into my mind. And when it came time to pick a cover picture for the book, it had to be this one. It had to be this one. But yes, words, gestures all have meaning. And this, when it was done, they were a civil servant. All these civil servants in Germany were Sieg Heiling the Führer, allegiance to the Führer and the government. But how was the guy on the street viewing this when they started killing Jews in concentration camps? These are our priests.
Okay. All right, you and then you. Okay.
In the Protestant church, there were a number of books that were written about the theologians under Hitler.
Hitler's theologians.
Right, and so there were a number of and there was a lot of study post World War II about the church's role within the Holocaust. My question is, why did it take so long with Catholicism?
Well, it wasn't until 1958 that Pius XII passed from the scene. Nothing happened before then. Survivors of the Holocaust were so traumatized by their experience, they couldn't bring themselves to talk about it. Their way of dealing with it was to disassociate from it as if it didn't happen. 1960 seemed to be a watershed, and The Deputy was written in 1960. It opened in Berlin, in London, and Broadway, about simultaneously. And that kind of opened the floodgates of Holocaust literature. And that's why Pius's defenders will all quote the defenses of Pius XII that happened before 1960. You have people like Golda Meir, thanking Pius XII for saving Jews during the Holocaust. Well, Golda Meir was the head of the Jewish state of Israel. You know when the Vatican recognized the Jewish state in Israel?
Right after that.
1998. Okay, now understand this. What was the first sovereign nation to enter a treaty with Hitler? Reich Concordat. Hitler came to power January 1933. July 1933, Reich Concordat legitimized the Nazi government. The Nazis, right? Understand that the platform of the Nazi party had anti-Semitism as its primary plank. So, should the Vatican, a lot of countries were holding back because they didn't trust Hitler, they didn't know what to do. And the first country out of the box to, in effect, give its imprimatur to the new regime is Vatican City.
Gentleman in the back.
Cardinal Eugene Pacelli, prior to becoming the Secretary of State and writing the Reich Concordat, wasn't he also the Papa Nuncio of Berlin for about 12 years?
Yes, he spoke fluent German. He loved German, Germany, German people, German culture. Yes, it's in the book.
He sounds like he's quite a Germanophile. Have you addressed in the book at all how he and the head of the Jesuit Society in Rome prevented Pius XI from issuing a new concordat condemning the Nazis' treatment?
If you read the book, you'll see that there's what's called a hidden encyclical. There was an encyclical. Pius XI came out with Mit Brenninger Sorge. It was written in German, and for the first time the church came out and criticized Nazi Germany. And there was hell to pay for it. The documents were seized and burned, and show trials of priests began. But subsequent to that, there was another encyclical that was the hidden encyclical, and it was hidden by Pius XII, who succeeded him. And that went even further.
Final question?
I just wanted to ask, how did Vatican II actually state that they were no longer going to fault the Jews or the Jewish nation or people? How did they word it?
It's, wait a minute, let me see if I can find it quickly.
That they're no longer the killers of Jesus?
And can you read?
Yes. How did Vatican II repudiate anti-Judaism? In which documents?
And how do they say it, what are their words?
You have to buy the book and read it.
Yeah, it's here. I'm just trying to quickly find it. By the way, when the book is republished, there will be an index. It doesn't have an index at the moment.
And what year is Vatican II again?
62 to 65. This is the 50th anniversary of Vatican Council II. Okay, Vatican Council II repudiated and reversed anti-Judaism, a change that could have been made by any pope during the papacy's 1900-plus year history. Right? It didn't take the act of an ecumenical council to repudiate anti-Judaism. A pope could have done it too, particularly a pope who's infallible. But in any event, at last, this pernicious doctrine on Jews as Christ killers and rejected children of God was ended. The council declared, mindful of her common patrimony with the Jews, that's the church's common patrimony with the Jews, and motivated by the gospel's spiritual love and by no political considerations directed against the Jews at any time and from any source, Nostra Aetate, in our time, was the document that did this, declared, no collective guilt can be attributed to Jews, past or present, for the death of Jesus. 2, God's covenant with the Jewish people is valid and has not been revoked. 3, the Jews are not forsaken and condemned by God. And 4, anti-Semitism is a sin and has no place in Christianity. Right? Until those words were said in 1965, the obverse, the opposite, was the case, the doctrine of the church.
Okay,
We
one
gotta
more.
bring this to an end.
All right, and then we're going to
Yes.
close it off. Go ahead.
Yes.
It is not until after Nostra Aetate that a lot of the other Christian movements then also made statements and have made the movements forward that they have. So the Catholic Church was the first to take those major steps.
Absolutely.
And so for whatever we want to look at for any of the other Christian documents, they all come after 1962. And so Nostra Aetate is very important. I think the piece that is a challenge for those of us who do not come from hierarchical systems is that Nostra Aetate gave that guidance, but it didn't trickle down to many local churches. So for those of us growing up in the 60s, we still heard blood libels in this country that people learned in their churches and came and asked us as Jewish people, what were we doing with children's blood? So it took a long time to come to the churches and to the people. And when we look at the work we do now, there are Catholic people involved in interfaith work, and we do have Father Tim doing this work with us in so many ways. But you talk about the dissent and the free thinking of different ways within the Catholic Church. I'm not sure that we have experienced that in this area as much as we'd like to. It's been done at the level of universities and seminaries, and in that level, and I've been involved in some of that work. And so I applaud your work in going in some different directions than what the church officially allows, and hope that there is much more of that to happen. But I think as we all look at the things, we each can say, well, my group did this and my group did that. The Catholic Church took a major lead in that, and I believe it's Christian people in Europe who took the lead in so much of it because it was so hard to reconcile what they learned had happened after the war and the question of their role.
Absolutely right. It wasn't until 1998 that We Remember came out, and this came out under the pontificate of Pope John Paul II, which is supposedly an apology, which is not really an apology. So the church has been struggling with this issue for a long time, and it is still struggling with it because, again, under the last two popes, they were seeming to go backwards. I think we need to, as I say, Francis, a breath of fresh air, but actions speak louder than words. We need to, hold his feet to the fire. And this is one of the reasons I wrote the book, because people need to understand the truth of this. And just I'll leave you with this. Pope, probably the greatest pope in history is Pope Gregory I. And he said this, and this is what I tell my fellow Catholics who say, why are you airing this dirty laundry? Why do you talk about these things? It's over with, it's done with. Well, this is what St. Gregory said. Though scandal be taken at a truth, it is better to admit the truth than to deny the scandal. Right? Better to admit the truth than deny the scandal. The church has come a long way. It's taken 2,000 years, but it's still got a ways to go. And if you think about the issue with the pre-sex abuse scandal, it's the same thing. There's clericalism has been a part of the Catholic Church for centuries. And it's that we are clerics, we know better than you, we have the truth and you don't. That's how you can justify not, calling the police because father has abused a child, but sending him to another parish where he's going to do it again, thinking that perhaps if he prays enough and, it's not going to happen again. You don't want to cause scandal. That's what happens when you're a perfect church, a perfect society, and you do no wrong. You can't admit that you made a mistake, that there's error. And in trying to cover it up, you make it worse, right? Because it's compounding the felony. The act of the abuse is bad enough, but when you try to cover it up, and by doing that, the abuse continues, and more kids are abused, that's making it worse. So it's better to admit the scandal than deny the truth.
Tony, I thank you so much for being a part of us, and for Diane.
Thank you for inviting us.
It's really impressive to have every question you're immediately going, yeah. Okay, I mean, you're truly a judge. You're well prepared. I wanted to thank Sima for bringing the cookies, goodies. There's also grapes, so we'll open the doors, let you enjoy coffee. There's little bottles of water for those of you who need refreshing coffee, hot water. So enjoy, and Tony and Diane will be over here, and you can talk to Tony there too.